Hi, this is Debbie and I'm sharing a video I created for my Doodling with Debbie series for Simon Says Stamp. Today I'm making the most of watercolour prints. The sets of watercolour prints that Simon Says Stamp stock are designed by Suzy Plantamura and printed on Tim Holt's distressed watercolour card. They're great value at under $10 per 12 card set, that's just over 80 cents per card. But when I saw the new succulent set, I knew I could stretch that even further. Here's a look at that set. Lots of fabulous succulent and cacti illustrations. I mean, that one with the llama is just gorgeous, but I've saved the best till last with these cards which have an arrangement of smaller images. It was this image with a cacti on a shelf that got me thinking, and then looking at the other cards, I was struck by with a little fussy cutting, I could make so many more cards from these smaller images. I took that last card and set about watercolouring 3 pots of plants. I'm watercolouring today as I love this medium and the cards are printed on Tim Holt's distressed watercolour cards, so you have that option. However, don't feel that you have to watercolour. I've seen all types of media used on these cards: Copics, pencils, markers. The important thing is to use what you have available or what you are most comfortable with. I'm still in love with the look of watercolour, and so that was my choice for today. I'm using Daniel Smith watercolours and slowly adding layers of colour to the plants. You don't have to worry about being too detailed, as these are relatively small images, and so a light first wash of colour followed by a little shading is all that's needed. As you can see, I watercolour slowly, taking my time and enjoying the process. I often stick a TV show or podcast on my iPad to keep me company, as I lose all track of time just tootling along with my paints. I sped the video up now so I can include as much of the painting as possible without the video becoming too long, but I think it's important to show that first bit at real speed. I love to see speeded up videos to get the information I want as quickly as possible, but it can take away from the reality of the time involved. Because let's face it, any form of colouring takes a bit of time, and watercolouring possibly more so than other options. But I still love it and pick up my paints at every opportunity. I'm moving around the 3 images, painting areas which are not next to each other. That is so that the paint has time to dry before I paint its neighbour, and this helps prevent paint from blending and moving from one leaf to another and defines each leaf from the one next to it. When I colour an image, I usually plan on the light source coming from the top right with shadows on the left. So for example, I painted each of the plant pots with more shading and depth of colour on the left. For other shadows, I looked as to where a leaf would be shaded by its neighbour, or where a petal would have a deeper colour at its base. As I said before, I'm not worrying too much about adding lots of detail, but a little shading helps to bring things to life more. Another tip to keep things interesting is to add different colours. For this third cacti, I started with a little green, but then added a deep blue on one side and a rich yellow near the top. And that blue helps tie in the plant to the blue pot I painted for it. I really could keep fiddling for ages and have to stop and remind myself to let it go and not take it too far. When I look at watercoloured images, I'm drawn to the looser rather than super realistic styles. And so after adding a few more deeper tones, I moved on to adding some detail and highlights with white gouache. I keep harping on about white gouache, but whether you like watercolouring or not, I think a tube of white gouache should be in everybody's toolbox. It gives such great opacity that you can paint it over darker colours and it still gives that great white highlight. I even painted it over the black polka dots on the pink pot, and it covered that fine too. I started with Winsor & Newton permanent white gouache and I've loved it so much I've never felt the need to try anything else. Once I'd finished painting, I dried the card with a heat tool and then fussy cut each of the 3 images out. I left a small white border around each, and that is so that I could keep the spikes on the cacti intact. My tip when fussy cutting is to keep the scissors steady and instead move the card as you cut. Also start with the fiddly bits first when you have more card to keep a hold of, rather than leaving those until last and then struggle to have much to hold on to. I then set the 3 plant pots to one side while I worked on the background for this card. I have used the Scallop Waves background stamp on virtually every card I've made since I received it. I love the scallops and find they make a great subtle background, particularly when stamped in a tone-on-tone way on craft card. I placed the stamp in the MISTI and stamped it in embossing ink on Neenah Desert Storm card. This ink is clear and slightly sticky when wet, and that is what embossing powder adheres to. However, I'm not embossing today, I'm just letting the ink give a slightly darker tone on the card. I used to make a lot of 4-bar cards. These little cards are only 3.5 by 5 inches, and I think their small size is adorable and particularly suits these 3 small plant pot images. So I cut the background down, and I did make a mistake on my dimensions though, and you'll see later on how I fixed that. I've added foam adhesive to the back of each of the pots and then trimmed a piece of striped pattern paper for the plants to stand on and added foam adhesive to the back of that too. I then splattered the background panel with black paint and then white gouache to give a little more interest, and then dried it with a heat tool. For the sentiment I used the Thanks and Encouragement set. This set has 2 large stamps with a variety of messages spaced out over them and then a matching die to cut them out. I stamped the thank you images in clear embossing ink on black card and then sprinkled with white embossing powder before heat setting. I then aligned the matching die, held it in place with washi tape and ran it through my die cutting machine. I'm only going to use one of the sentiments today, but I'll tuck the rest away for another time. I cut and scored a 4-bar card base from ivory card, and now you see where my mistake was in cutting the craft background panel. I'd made it too narrow. However, I fixed that easily by adding another strip of pattern paper along the long edge, and actually I prefer the extra detail this brings to the card, so a happy mistake in the end. I added foam adhesive to the back of the panel and added that to the card base, and then used the waves of the background to help keep my striped shelf for the plants to stand on straight. I then added each of the plant pots with foam adhesive and the same for the sentiment strip. And finally it's just time for a little embellishment. I do like adding a triangle of sequins, enamel dots, Nuvo droplets, crystals or such to catch the eye and draw the attention to the focal point. Even numbers are supposed to be attractive to the eye, and so a triangle of embellishments is just right. I added 3 sequins from the new Sunken Treasures sequin mix and kept them in place with Gina K Connect glue, and then paired them with Dragon Scales Nuvo droplets. I'm loving Christina Werner's envelopes, and she has inspired me to take a little more care with my envelopes. Just a little touch of a stamped tone-on-tone thank you on the flap of the envelope using a sentiment from the Greetings Mix 1 set, stamped in clear embossing ink, and then a little twine around the envelope to tie into the black and white stripes of the paper strips on the card. And there you have one little succulent and cacti card which used just 3 of the images from one of the prints from the succulent set. I could make 2 more cards just from this one print, and there are more options in the other prints too. I really enjoyed taking these 3 plant pots and making this little card, and I'll be sure to be making more of these. I'll leave links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used today, as well as a link to the coordinating blog post over at limedutydesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to get notified when a new video is out, don't forget to hit the bell button next to the subscribe button too. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.